After the horrible movies, we haven't gotten a decent Percy Jackson motion picture for a while until now. The first book of the Percy Jackson series, The Lightning Thief, has now been adapted into a full show on Disney+, and to be honest, I kinda have some mixed feelings about this show. In this video, I'm gonna give my full non-spoiler and spoiler review of the show. I'm gonna split both reviews into different elements: characters, acting, plot, pacing, actions, visuals, and book similarities. I know characters and pacing and action would kind of fall under the plot section, but I kind of wanted to talk about them separately. Keep in mind that this is only my opinion and you're free to disagree. Everybody views these shows and everything else differently than I do, and that's great. Whether you hate it or love it, let me know in the comments and feel free to explain why you feel the way you do. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. In terms of characters, I think they're mostly solid. Percy Jackson, the main protagonist, is very likable and relatable. You understand his actions and motives, and that's pretty great for a main character. You follow him into this new world where he's completely new to and lost. His goals are admirable, and you really side with him throughout this whole journey. Also, he is the funniest character on the show. Annabeth is also really likable. Her personality and sassiness is funny, and watching a character like her interact with Percy and Grover is very enjoyable as well. Seeing her develop her relationship with Percy, and just as a character as she ends up becoming more open with people, is great. Grover is... if I had to describe Grover, I'd say he's a character that's just there. Honestly, I don't really remember anything that he really did other than just explain mythology stuff, and that's it. He's just kind of a character that you can take away from the quest or the series and barely anything would change. He had a moment with Ares, which was pretty cool, but ultimately it led to him saying something that was completely wrong, so yeah. He has his funny moments, but again, not much to say about Grover. He just kind of felt useless throughout this show, to me at least. I think Ares is kind of cool, I like his personality, and he's somewhat kind of funny to watch on screen. The only other characters to talk about are Luke and Sally Jackson. I like Luke a lot in this show. I think he's well cast, and he definitely portrays Luke in the first book really well. Sally Jackson is a big part of the show, and not much of her character is explored, but she's alright. Other than the characters I've mentioned, the rest that appeared aren't as important or are characters that aren't just explored deeply yet. Overall, I would say the characters are pretty solid. To me, the acting is kinda underwhelming. I don't think it's terrible, but there are two certain moments in this show where I felt like characters barely had any emotions or reactions in huge moments. One is in episode 1 and the other is in episode 7, but I'll discuss that in a spoiler review. The chemistry between the trio is... I don't really know how to feel. I don't really see the chemistry yet. Honestly, it felt like Percy and Annabeth had better chemistry than what the trio had together, and I feel like this due to how Grover was dealt with in the show, for now at least. I don't think I see chemistry yet between the three, but I think, I just have to wait. If more seasons are to come, then I think they will definitely be amazing. Overall, I think the acting is exceptional. It's not terrible, but it's not great either in my opinion. I'm counting each episode as like an event of the plot. I think the overall narrative of the show is pretty good for the most part. This first season follows the plot of the hero's journey, and I think for a lot of it was executed pretty well, and as more episodes come out, there is some new interesting information that kind of twists the story around a little. I think the world building is great as well. There are quite a lot of moments, for me it was in episode 3 and 6, where I felt some situations in the plot were not well executed. One gripe I have with this show is that if you haven't read the books, I think it's kind of hard to understand what's happening a couple times. It's hard to explain without discussing spoilers, so I'm sorry about that. It's just, there are some concepts that you need to understand, and to understand them you kind of have to read the books, which, kind of sucks, but I don't think it's that bad. Overall, most of the narrative is pretty good in my opinion. It's cliche, but it's very enjoyable. There were quite a few times where I think the show felt rushed, especially in the first 3 episodes. I looked back at the episodes, and the longest episode is 45 minutes while the shortest is 34 minutes. Obviously excluding the credits, it's shorter, but still. I feel like each episode should set a max run limit, and that is either 45 minutes or 50 minutes, because honestly, I did feel like we needed more time to connect with characters, explore their motives, and just let the audience settle down at times to take in the world around them. Especially at Camp Half-Blood, I wish we would have seen more of that. It felt more like a pit stop rather than like this amazing place that we're supposed to feel like it's home. The show didn't have as much action as I had expected. Okay, by that I meant like fighting wise, but for what it provided, I say a few of them. The fighting is seriously cool, and the rest of the action scenes were alright. Other than that, there's not much to say. I think the action in terms of fights and at its best, I would say it would be at episode 2 and 8. The worst action sequence I think I saw in this show was in episode 4 and 3. Overall, there's not much to say about the action. It ain't incredible, but it's alright. It's pretty good. I just don't see a lot to complain about the action scene. In terms of the settings, and especially how Camp Half-Blood looks, it's incredible. The set designs and pieces are awesome, and I can definitely envision them in the books. The only design I wasn't a big fan of was the design of the Master Bolt. In terms of CGI and stuff like green screen usage, just like the action sequences and acting, it's solid. I feel like the worst we've seen was in episode 4, but in that, it's alright. I guess I feel like there's just not much to brag about, nor is there much to complain about. However, looking at the budget for this series, I feel like they could have done better in a lot of parts. I'll get more into that when I discuss spoilers, but I will say, visuals are exceptional, but I feel like they could have done better with the budget that they had. Overall, visuals are decent. And finally, the book similarities. Now, Rick Riordan, the guy who wrote the Percy Jackson books and one of the writers of the show, claimed that this show will remain loyal to its source material, which is so far from the truth. There's a bunch of changes made in this show that obviously deviates itself from the book. I think half of these changes are alright and interesting, and half of these changes are bad, pointless, and confusing. I will say it is more loyal than the movies, but it really deviates from the book a lot. Okay, with the spoiler-free review out of the way, let's talk about the spoilers. Now look, I'm not gonna add a book similarity section under this because I'm gonna compare the show to the books as I go, and these are gonna be based off of my memory of the book, so keep that in mind. If I am incorrect about anything, let me know in the comments down below. And just a warning ahead, I will be talking more about the flaws that I see because I think they stand out to most. I think I pretty much said what I wanted to say in the non-spoiler free review, so you guys can just go and check that out as well. But, you know, with that just being said, let's just get right into it. Alright, I still stand by on what I said about Percy Jackson in the spoiler-free review. While in the books, Percy is willing to find the lightning bolt when Chiron opens up about the quest, but in the show, Percy actually rejects it in anger due to the absence of his father and the supposed death of his mother. This Percy is kinda similar to Logan Lerman's Percy in the movies, but they do make Walker's Percy more likable, and his reasons are somewhat more justified for rejecting the quest at first. But one thing that I really hate with what they did with Percy, and this kind of ties into the writing of the show, is how much they tell and don't show. In the books, without anyone telling, Percy can identify gods and figure things out in terms of knowledge in mythology, and in the books, it gives him and the audience a sense of wonder. Unlike in the show, Percy and us as an audience, we get information explained within like 3 seconds with no discovery or wonder. The show takes away Percy's knowledge and intelligence about the world he is supposed to be so invested in, and in doing so, it takes away the sense of wonder and admiration we and Percy are supposed to feel, just like in the books. I think Percy is a likable and great protagonist, but the changes I have just mentioned are definitely not good ones. I honestly think Annabeth is great. I actually think the show did her amazing. However, I will say I did not like how Annabeth just stood watching Percy getting beaten by Clarice and her friends in Capture the Flag sequence. That scene kind of bugged me, but other than that, everything else was pretty good. And now we get to Grover. Oh boy, was Grover changed a lot. One thing that I seriously hated with what they did with Grover was in episode 3 of the series where he just flies away in the darkness while trying to escape Medusa. And I remember sitting there being like, is this what they're doing with Grover? He was completely useless in this scene, and more so, he was useless in the entire show. In the books, Grover actually partakes in taking down Medusa. He's actually the one who puts the pieces together and figures out who Medusa is and where she takes the trio, which, that being her basement. He has quite a bit of these moments throughout the first book, and it feels like they've taken all that out in the show. He's more of just a comedic character that feels like he's there to complete the trio number and just to be funny. Again, I'm not hating on the actor playing him because I think he's alright, but the way his character was written just wasn't good in my opinion compared to the books. I've heard people saying that they gave Grover the Ron Weasley treatment, but at least Ron got his moments to shine in the movies, unlike Grover. There's not much to say about other characters except Luke. The actor who plays Luke is great in my opinion. I liked how Luke was handled in this show. Kinda. I feel like we should have gotten more scenes with them. I don't know why we have had flashbacks of Luke in the final episode. It is because we, as an audience, need to connect with him and actually remember him, because after episode 2, we pretty much never saw Luke again except for like in episodes 5 or 6 where he makes a brief appearance. But I'm like, why not put these flashbacks in the second episode? I feel like if we've gotten to connect with him more at the start, it would have made for a more impactful ending rather than connect with him in the ending and next be against him in the ending. It all feels a little too much. Still, I enjoyed Luke, and I think for what he had, it was alright. It was pretty good. There's also Sally Jackson, who is the idol to Percy, and she is also the only parental figure he has and loves, and I thought it was alright. Except the scene at the restaurant or cafe where Percy asks why his mom wants to get rid of him, and instead of consoling her son and saying that she doesn't want to get rid of him, she just walks away and says she's gonna pay for the food, and that's just kind of terrible. I'm not gonna lie. It probably would have been better if she didn't care about him, but that's not who Sally Jackson is in this show, so to have her do something like this is kind of out of character for me at least. Overall, there's not much to say about other characters, as I haven't really formed an opinion on them as we haven't seen much of them yet. I think the casting is alright for the most part, and again, the characters are pretty solid. The acting to me is okay. I don't think there's anything to really brag about. It's not terrible, but obviously it's not the best. There were certain parts where it was pretty underwhelming to me, and I'm gonna represent 2 examples of those certain parts. The first example is right at the first episode where Sally dies in front of Percy. Obviously, she doesn't die, but that's just how it seems to Percy, and this is his reaction to basically his mother dying in front of him. I went back to the books, and as I recalled, Percy had more of a reaction than the reaction show Percy gave. To me, it felt underwhelming because, let's be honest, if I was 12 again, and in general 12-year-olds would cry their heads out screaming no and feeling so much anger and sadness, and to be honest, I saw more of that in the books than in the show, so that big moment felt underwhelming to me. The second example is from episode 7, where Cerberus chases down our heroes and eats Grover. Now, I'm pretty sure this didn't happen in the book, so when this happened, you'd expect Percy to feel horrified, or, you know, something, but this was his reaction. Again, it may just be me, but I felt like the reaction that he gave here, it just feels pretty underwhelming. One last thing I like to add was that there was more chemistry between Percy and Annabeth than what the trio has together. I just don't see the chemistry between these 3 actors. I feel like it has improved a little bit since they first started the quest, but not much in my opinion. It may just be me. Now, I remember reading a comment claiming that off-screen and in interviews, the 3 actually have great chemistry, and that it's the script and directing that may be the problem. I haven't watched the interviews, so I'm not going to say anything about that, but if it is true, then there definitely is a problem with the writing and directing, to me at least. Again, I'll give them time if the next seasons are to come, but as of right now, I just don't see the chemistry between them. Other than those 2 moments and the chemistry between the trio, to me, the rest of the acting was pretty solid. I think Adam Copeland, the actor for Ares, was the best actor in the show. He's funny, and I think he has the most personality and more passion for his role. I like the actress for Annabeth, I think she's really cool. I also really like the actor playing Luke, as I genuinely feel the nice energy coming from that character, and he's definitely my third favorite from the show, second being Walker Scobell. Also, I gotta mention Lance Reddick, who played Zeus. He definitely killed the role in my opinion, and also rest in peace to him. Phew, so now we're getting into the longest part of the video, and oh boy, there is a lot to talk about. Now, I said for the most part, I think the narrative of the show is pretty good. Again, I think what the whole show is based around is super interesting, considering what's at stake here, but there were a lot of moments in these plot events where some of the writing decisions and some dialogue bugged me, and it didn't make much sense. I think some of these can be nitpicky, but hey, this is my opinion, so it's whatever. Some of these, I'm not going to use them to base my judgment on the show on this, since it didn't bother me that much, but I feel like these are things that should be mentioned. First is when Percy and his friends don't meet the deadline on time. Why would they make that change? I believe they did that so Poseidon could come in and protect Percy, so Percy and Poseidon could have their fatherly and son moment. Thing is, you could have added that by doing what the books did. After Zeus disappears, have Poseidon talk with Percy and give them their moment. There's no need to change the original source material if it leads to the same outcome. I feel like they did that just to be different from the books, which is fine, I guess. I just see this as an unnecessary change. And there are other things like Percy discovering the bolt in his bag. First off, he got the backpack from Hades and Percy just doesn't look inside of it, not once. Like, a random stranger, a god of war at that, gives Percy Jackson a backpack and he just doesn't look inside of it once. Like, tell me if I'm wrong, but if I got a bag from a random stranger, a god at that, I would look inside of it and see what's going on. Now, he did say he packed clothes and cash, but in the books, Percy actually checks the bag. Throughout the show, it's been clear that this guy cannot be trusted, and Percy clearly does not trust Ares in the show, based on the way they act towards each other and stuff. Percy has no reason to trust Ares, so him not even checking the bag and taking Ares' word for it is crazy to me. Even if the bolt was not in there in the first place, it's still pretty suspicious. There was no sign of Percy telling or even showing that he struggles to carry the bag because Zeus's bolt is pretty heavy, so technically, we don't know how long the bolt has been inside Percy's bag in the show. Now obviously, there had to have been a point where the bolt ended up in Percy's bag, but even that was not explained how it got there. In the books, the bag is actually a form of a sheath for Zeus's bolt, so that makes it where the master bolt returns to the sheath. Ares manipulates the magic so the bolt could arrive once Percy is in the underworld. But we got no sign of Percy feeling as if the bag was heavy, nor was the explanation I just gave was in the show. The book explained that in the chapter right after, but the show hasn't. Leaving things unexplained can get confusing for a lot of audience members who even haven't read the books. Now, those are quite a few examples, mainly like towards the end of the show. I want to talk about episode 3, which is my least favorite episode. While I hated how Medusa was portrayed in this episode, there's just a lot more to go over. The Fury legit stood there the whole time for who knows how long just to get beaten by Medusa's head. Like, you couldn't try and come up with a strategy? Not call one of your other sisters? Maybe contact Hades? Legit, anything like that would have been better than simply standing there. If you're gonna pose a threat, do not waste them like that. There was no purpose for the Fury in this episode, which bugs me. There's also the basement scene where Grover was stupidly flown away, and his moment in taking down Medusa was just taken from him. Also, the bus scene was pretty stupid. Like, when Percy or Grover yell, "Go, go, go," and they break the window, nobody bats an eye behind them. The bus driver calls for an immediate evacuation for some reason, and he just takes a glance in the mirror, and that's it. Glass gets destroyed, and when the Fury flies in, and again, nobody looks back? There are so many of these moments in the plot where it's kind of hard to not question because small details like this are overlooked and they can be questioned a lot. You can use mist as an excuse for this scene, but even in this case, it doesn't really work because mist doesn't just hide the supernatural things going on in this world from the mortals, but it twists their side of it to something they can comprehend. Humans can definitely comprehend glass being shattered and blown up, so why does nobody hear or look at that? I don't even remember if mist was explained earlier in the show, but I may be wrong, but even if it was, I question how mist works now because of this incident. This video is going to be pretty long, and I don't really want to talk about every single little detail, but the last thing I'm going to mention is Luke's betrayal. I love this scene at first, but when I went back to rewatch it, I kind of got confused. So apparently Luke was trying to recruit Percy whilst trying to kill him as well? Unless Luke is trying to play some mind games, which if he is, then this show isn't quote-unquote just made for kids, as a lot of people have been saying as a response to people criticizing this show. First of all, okay, there's just like a lot to dissect here. First of all, Luke said he was here trying to recruit Percy, but he tried to kill him by dragging Percy to the underworld with the flying shoes, and then he tried killing Percy again at the fight at Camp Half-Blood. Like, what? Is Luke trying to play some kind of mind games, or is he being genuine? I actually like this because, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, Luke is a manipulator, and it does fit his character to play mind games and lie like that, but I don't know, it's just something about that doesn't seem right in the writing sense, for me at least. But at the same time, he's trying to help Kronos, right? In the first dream sequence of episode 6, we see Kronos talking to the lightning thief, which is Luke. Luke does get contacted by Kronos in his sleep, just like how Percy does. So Kronos is using Luke as a way to regain his power. So wouldn't he mention to Luke to keep Percy alive if Kronos claims he is the key to revive Kronos? If he didn't, then that explained why Luke was trying to kill Percy, but again, why would you not tell Luke that? Unless you have another plan, but then that just leaves unanswered holes and questions that the audience will have to wait for a while to be revealed. Not only that, but now the show isn't faithful to the source material as it was claimed to be, because I don't remember the original source material having these many holes and questions. It just confused me because things are just intertwining with each other so much, and if that's the case, then, well, I mean, at least now we know this show isn't for kids. But the scene that really bothered me was Annabeth being there, that wasn't even part of the books. She wasn't there, and this just adds some more holes to the story. She's been there this whole time, and she waits until Luke was more than halfway through opening the portal, and until Percy gets hurt when she finally steps in and helps. Like, what? The amount of things that could have been done here is crazy. Why would she even follow them into the forest? Why was she there? It would have been better if she was just trying to search for Percy and Luke and trying to invite them to some kind of, I don't know, dinner or something, because we see fireworks in the background going off, and then she stumbles upon them fighting it, and then she just tries to step in and help. Like, that makes more sense than her just being there this whole time and not helping until the worst moment possible. There are quite a few of these holes in almost every episode out there, especially ones in the Lotus episode, the Medusa episode, and the Underworld episode. This is just one of the examples of how minor changes to little or big details can create huge holes and obstacles if not done carefully or correctly. And then there's some dialogue which I think is pretty stupid. I already mentioned the cafe scene with Sally and Percy, so that's one. The other is where Percy says he trusts Grover. Grover responds with, "I'm gonna pack the greatest snacks" or something, and I don't know, that's just not how anyone responds to "I trust you," including kids, but it's whatever. The other is in the final episode where Percy is fighting Luke and he asks why he needs to practice with a sword, and literally says, "When am I ever going to need this stuff?" And not even 5 seconds later, Percy mentions he fought the Minotaur. Like, what? If he knows all that, why would you have Percy question why he needs to learn how to fight? And the other question is where in episode 6, Grover asked Percy if it was his fault that the mission was getting held back, and Percy just puts a hand on his shoulder and says it's okay. Like, it isn't really Grover's fault, so why are you implying that it is? And also, if this was Percy's best friend, as Percy himself claims to trust so much, wouldn't he be trying to console him? Even if he wasn't trying to console him, a response like that to Grover's question just didn't feel something like a kid would say. It just doesn't feel like a real response. Again, there's a bunch of changes I actually did like to the plot, like the 4 pearls given to Percy instead of 3. I also like the addition of the Council of Cloven Elders in the 2nd episode. Again, I think they appeared in the 4th or 5th book, I don't really remember. The show is filled with plot decisions and certain storylines where some things just didn't make sense to add or change, while it also adds on to stuff that are interesting, and it could add something new to the series. It's kind of bad and good to me. Like, I would say it's like half and half, I would say. Now, is the story as a whole terrible? No, I don't really think so. I feel like it's more generic, but it doesn't mean it's bad. I just think there is a lot of flaws that affect this show greatly more than the positives it has, and I think that's why I kind of talked a little bit more about the negatives I had with the story rather than the positives, because I do think personally that the negatives that the show has affects the positives, but again, like, despite that, I am still able to enjoy the entire story. So yeah, a lot of the story and plot have problems and unnecessary changes, but as a whole, I enjoyed most of it. I think the story is pretty decent, but it has a lot of flaws, and unfortunately, I cannot really ignore them. For me, I think this show would have been better if it was given an extra episode or just longer episodes. Mainly in the first 3. Like I said before with Luke, I wish we spent more time with them and Camp Half-Blood to settle down and relax after what Percy had to go through when he got there. Camp Half-Blood felt more like a pit stop for me instead of this home that I'm supposed to feel, so it's just kind of a bummer at that. What's important with pacing is also understanding and coming eye to eye with some of the characters' major decisions in this series. One of those examples is Percy picking Grover as the third member of his team. Literally, all we've seen Grover do was snitch on Percy, which Percy was still hurt by at this moment, and introduce him to Dionysus. And for those of you who are about to say Grover snitched to protect Percy, let's not forget the scene that gets followed up right after where Percy was sitting alone on a bench for who knows how long, where he is exposed to danger and he could have gotten hurt at like any moment. I don't think Percy should have not picked Grover, but to me, the foundation of the friendship wasn't that present to me. And I guess you could say that in the start, Percy states that him and Grover are friends, but that's not enough. You can't build a friendship just by telling us, you have to show us. Show, don't tell. There wasn't enough time to actually build upon Grover and Percy's friendship and spend time with one another a little bit before the quest, because we sped through a lot of things. If I was in Percy's position, I definitely would have chosen somebody like Luke, as he seemed more like a friend to Percy than what we've seen Grover do. This is just an example of the first couple episodes feeling rushed, because some decisions made by the characters and just overall feel to it feels fast and not well built up. But for me, after episode 3, episodes 4 through 8 had pretty decent pacing in my opinion. There was room to breathe and someone explore this new world, and I thought the story took its time. Also, please, I know this is a book adaptation, but cutting to a black screen to indicate the end of a character is unnecessary. I get they're trying to be clever, but it's simply, we don't need that. In the first episode, when the car crashed, in the middle of the action, it was all cut to a black screen, and then we see the car already flipped over. It kinda drained the suspense I had for this moment. It just unnecessarily slows down the action abruptly for me. I just don't see the reason to indicate the end of chapters from the book to a show. Just show us the crash and show every other single scene. There's no need for that. It can disrupt pacing and ruin suspense. But overall, I think the pacing is okay for the most part. Most of the fighting in the season is actually super cool, mainly in episode 2 and episode 8. I love the choreography and the intense situations, it got me pretty excited. The worst fight I think we have gotten was in the last fight in episode 4 where this scene happens. Like, how? The Chimera is super intelligent, super strong, and it breathes fire, and somehow it's unable to hit a 12-year-old kid with its fire breath? How does Percy even avoid the fire right there? This is by far the worst fight in my opinion, considering that this was barely a fight, and that it just had the most boring action in my opinion, and one of the worst adapted fights from a book. In the book, we actually see the Chimera move around a lot as it swings its tail and bites Percy, while in the show, it just stands still, not moving around much. But it's not just the fighting that's not really the greatest, it's when we see Percy standing back up when he's hurt and now that he lost Riptide, showcasing his dedication and will to not give up. Not only that, but we get a moment of Percy viewing a family and a kid hiding behind his father, and when Percy sees that, he tells himself that he has to protect them and that he just couldn't die. This speaks volume for a character, and not including that is a waste in my opinion. But for everything else, I love the fight scenes and the action this show provided. I do have some nitpicks about the last fight since, like, in terms of just fighting in general, but I still loved it. For the most part, the fighting and action-packed sequences are really good in my opinion. I don't think there's much to brag about the visuals. There are some design changes like the Chimera, which I really like, and again, most of the design set pieces are really cool in my opinion. It looks super cool. CGI and green screen was okay, nothing much to show off or complain about. However, there were a few scenes that I felt like it just wasn't, I guess you could say, real. It just didn't feel like the characters were actually there. Like these examples right here, I don't know, it may just be me, but to me, I felt like this was just plain green screen, and it kind of took me out of the show because of how unrealistic it looked to me. Again, this may just be me, let me know if you guys feel the same way about this in the comments. But I meant what I said before, that the set pieces and the entire look is amazing. I love the look of Camp Half-Blood and just everything else. Except for the casino, I guess, or I could say the inside of the casino. I actually think the movie made the casino look better than the show, except the outside building. The fact that they made the Lotus Casino as an actual lotus flower is so awesome. However, I don't really like the design of the Zeus Master Bolt. I actually think the movies did it better, and I think the Love and Thunder made it look better too. I think this design will eventually grow on me, but so far, it's just not really doing it for me. But I mean, other than that, I think the visuals are super cool. Nothing too oppressive, nor too terrible. They're alright. Now, before I give my overall rating of the show, I'm going to quickly talk about a big excuse that a lot of people try to use to defend the show for the flaws it has, and that is, it was made for kids. I've seen a lot of people try to use that excuse for people to not look deeply in the show. It's a bad argument because the books do everything correctly in terms of what we criticize the show more. Like showing more telling, letting Percy discover things, not overlooking small details, and the book is still made for kids too. And also, the story itself is pretty interesting. Adults are allowed to read the story. Yes, the series is very great read for kids and teens, but that doesn't mean adults or young adults cannot enjoy it either. Adults and teens and even young adults are allowed to enjoy things too. It's actually great when the entire age demographic can enjoy a certain book or series of books. It's amazing, so why wouldn't you want that? So to use an excuse that it's made for kids would first of all be a dumb decision to make in the first place, because the book is enjoyed by everybody, and excluding parts of the audience to favor one audience over the other is a dick move in my opinion. Second of all, capturing the entire audience of the original source material will make the series more loved and more successful. Third of all, kids aren't dumb. They don't need to be told everything. They're able to understand some simple things that don't need to be explained. We don't need to be told who Dionysus is. We don't need to learn about every mythological thing. Just show us. You can have some explanation parts here and there, but don't explain the entire thing. Kids don't need every single little word spelled out to them. Fourth of all, shows show. They're not papers filled with words. That's the book's job. Let the show speak for itself by presenting us the information rather than spelling stuff out. It's a major motion picture. That's its job. So to anyone who uses the excuse that it's made for kids, one, if you're gonna do that, then make sure to criticize the books. Second, Percy Jackson is a series for everyone to enjoy, and they're allowed to feel how they feel. Third, kids aren't stupid, they deserve great things too. Finally, with that being said, despite the criticisms I had for the show, I still enjoyed it. For me, I give this show a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10. I know I kinda bashed this show a lot more than complimenting it. I tried to be fair as much as I can, but I think it's because I was trying to critique it as a show and as a fan of the books. I still had a fun time watching it, and I can honestly say I'm excited for the second season. I think there's a lot of stuff to like about this series, but there is a lot of things I think they can definitely improve on, and they definitely should fix in the next season. If you have read the books or not, I'd say give it a shot. Anyways, that's gonna be it for my review. Let me know what you guys think on my review and the show. Anyways, that's gonna be it for my review. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the show and my review. Thank you so much for watching, and have an amazing day.